statements before still counterpoint and then T. On the counterpoint, we'll concede the perm, but that just proves that there is no competing methodologies. They specifically said that there is absolutely no trade-off with doing the counterpoint or doing the affirmative, which is a specific reason why you're gonna end up flowing this over to the T flow, because there is no, because that means that you can talk about things such as warming methodologies. They specifically said that there is absolutely no trade-off between the counterpoint or doing the affirmative, which is a specific reason why you're gonna on that. So on the top. First, topical affirmatives must defend the resolution, and the A conceded the turn. 12 it says that climate policy is policies that are aimed at reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. They have absolutely no other interpretation of what climate policy is, which means that this is what you should prefer. Also, that limits or restrictions are limits, or that prohibit the action. That's around 12 evidence that the 1AC failed to make the demands that the U.S. should create a domestic climate policy to restrict the greenhouse gas emissions. The first argument here is their counter interpretation. First, it's not predictable in any round. Solution is predictable before round. Also, it doesn't necessarily work for everyone to be able to follow within their resolution. Also, there is no clear way of how teams that are not black and disabled should access this interpretation, because it is not a view of how they would have any access to this. And there are, as the affirmative said, there are other aspects to it. So that means that we should have a broad resolution for how the affirmative should be able to be interpreted in order to have to gain the education and fairness. Also, there are interpretation allows everyone to have access within the space, which is disattached to their interpretation. Also, they don't meet their own interpretation because they don't discuss the resolution. They say that we should look at it through the black disabled people, but it should happen. That's how they engage the resolution. But the resolution, they don't actually talk about climate policy, which is the core portion of this, or is substantially increasing the restriction on the private sector. They only tell you about the effects of greenhouse gas emissions, which is not the same thing as being able to actually engage with the resolution. Also, next. On the impact level, our first impact is ground by shifting discussion away from the defensive restrictions. That we no longer have stable links to any topic-based discussions, which are the core negative strategy for every year. They on the bottom of your flow, they have an answer to this, which talks about how we just never engage with what they're saying, but that can happen through things like the counterplan or other topical versions of the app, because the ground is specifically, you have to look at the good and the bad. Otherwise, they are just preaching to the choir, and you aren't actually able to talk about any things in depth. They also are able to perm any other method that we could possibly come up with, because they don't just trust a specific strategy or have an advocacy statement or a plan that holds them to a certain thing, which means that they are always a moving target, and that is particularly bad for debate, especially when there is no topic to be tied to. Also, instead, they have shifted the affirmative and negative burdens, which makes all of our preseason research pointless, which kills clash in education. They also give the negative ground no ground that pertains to greenhouse gas emissions, and this turns the case because the base generally has the ability to change people's attitudes, because it forces pre-round internal deliberation and focus topic of debate, not because the round itself acts as a consensus or the ballot produces currency. Go to Nair 3. The effect of the information phase of the deliberative process was to brush away the highly polarized attitudes and to dispel the myth of the symbolic posturing and deliberate the people act upon their attitudes. The key point is happening in the early stages before the formal discussion. We let our ordinary life and autopilot without the reflection. We come across as new. We update our running beliefs accordingly. Elements of pre-discursive process are crucial to the shaping and the reshaping of people's attitudes, focusing attention on the topic, providing information, inviting people to think hard, but is likely strong, provided the strong impetus of the internal reflective deliberative, altering the way that people view process and for information and what they think, the anticipation, the participation, the formally organized groups, the sections, and might promote the evokes attributes, macro deliberative process, concentrate people's minds on a single issue that has been already agreed by the stakeholders. In ordinary mass politics, this is really equivalent to the common ground on which debates are conducted. And the next portion is going to be the limits debate. Our second impact is limits, because the app encourages a model that exposes the limits on the topic, which means that it makes it impossible to have in-depth discussions and predictions. Clash could lack specificity, which means that we'll never be able to access the affirmative on the substantive level, and therefore discussions of the app will always be shallow, implicating their solvency. And this acts as a solvency check out to any of their in-round solvency claims. And also also not being topical means that the AFA forces the negative to negate not just the content of the 1EC, but the very debaters who wrote it, which causes the debate people to leave the community, and also to the violence to debaters themselves. And the next impact is going to be the value of policy debate. Policy debate is a unique forum in which people come into prepared with opposing cases and non-topical themes that destroy the value of policy debate, because it will become a lesser form of debate, like parley. The critique also doesn't have the same value in this forum, and parliamentary debate, even which means that there's a different forum here in which we are also talking. This would be good in a place where for like a speech event or something like that, because then you are preaching to the choir and the people aren't there to negate what you are saying, and that is like more of a forum for an FYI, or having a larger forum to be able to discuss with people is a more like appropriate places to do this. But here, the resolution mandates that we are able to work towards solutions, and that is not something the affirmative does. They also say that they are a prerequisite. Sorry, this is the top of the flow, but that doesn't necessarily mean that being a prerequisite it doesn't mean that you get to not debate us anymore. We're not here to discuss the prerequisite yes or no. It's about the policies and what should happen as a result of this. So while these stands why these things might be true, that means that we should be talking about solutions for this, as opposed to just saying, oh, these things are bad and give me the ballot. That doesn't make any sense. Also, on the I'm going to answer the other term really quick that they had, the perfectionist app. In debate, just existing is not enough for anybody in order just to get the ballot for that, and that is because the format of debate is meant to have discussion where a winner is chosen, so existing is enough to be valued as a human, but that is different than saying that you get the ballot for that. Also, the psyche of violence can never be wholly solved, so you should look into the degree in which the negative would make that worse and still follow the rules, and they still follow the rules of debate, so there's no right line or reason why being topical is specifically the key that causes this impact as opposed to something else. They also say that we only cause the elite form of education, but we actually create well-informed, engaged citizenry that is vital to preventing authoritarian actions from elites from filling in the space left by their abstraction of politics debate. It fosters the political engagement at the macro level. It's vital to reversing the current retreats from politics. Box 97. The space abdicated by the broad centers can be in fact be filled with authoritarian elites. Would be the embodiment of those interests that have this goal of recovering the politics suggests revitalization. This is prepared to accompany the immense expanse of flow skills and attitudes vital to political efficiency and flourish in the widely distributed without the consciousness of the transformation and the possible and the politically meaningless and deliberative process of the anti-politics that is the values of the very type of skills and the attitudes. And actually, they also say that we are exclusive. We don't specifically mandate a certain kind of debate that comes from this. We say that you can do what you do. We just think that the method of the solvency is the more important question here, because that allows teams to actually engage, whereas you never let teams engage with you because requiring saying that some things are bad, but there's never a change to be able to go away from that. Also, they can also put the 1EC is good and educational all they want, but that isn't a reason why you think that why they get to read what they read in this round. Moreover, I think their bid to education severely undercuts their impact, because we couldn't participate in this discussion not because we don't want to, but because the parameters for this topic have already been set. If I told you how to fix your car in this round, it might be helpful, but it doesn't mean that we gain education. That the debate has the ability to have the uniqueness to provide their education, or why doing IEs would be a good thing. That their topic is important, but they also conceded that warming is a threat multiplier and is also just as important to be able to have these discussions on this, because solving warming is a prerequisite for achieving global justice is a massive cause of structural violence and spills over to create movements and solve other forms of oppression. Glyconide. The issue needs to be one in every person should be taking action. The cascading series of ecological disasters and revolutionary movement doesn't call it the action to prevent the white catastrophe is total contradiction. The climate crisis is a fundamental justice issue who is being hit the first and the hardest. The people who did the least to cause it, low-income people and people of color cut the card there, and that means that they aren't going to be able to do that. They also aren't able to create, on their Dillon evidence, they say that they're able to create better form of education, but no, people aren't able to engage in that education. That education can come in as that was already answered above, and we don't say that the USFG has to be necessarily the subject, but rather it's the focus on how we go about the world that is already existing to change the status quo. Okay.
You go first?
Yeah.
My first question about that last statement, how is for you the idea is that we have to use the U.S. as an actor, you're saying we need actual solvency. How is that not making them the center of the discussion?
Right, because essentially you're making them the center of the discussion by saying USFG good bad. We say that we should focus on things like, does cap and trade solve? Does reducing emissions from the private sector work?
And
do these things happen?
The focus on the government, the actor.
We don't talk about the actor on the same level as talking about the actual plan to be able to do that.
My next question is, you say preaching, we're preaching to a choir. What makes you the choir?
We say that the debate community is the choir.
The debate
also,
choir.
Because
debate
people.
Community is ableist.
The debate community that includes people like John Katsoulis, who say in their paradigm that performance belongs in theater class, they're part of the choir. I don't understand.
Right. So just because you can highlight one person,
I
that
can highlight.
isn't
We don't have enough time.
there's still other people that are in here that are.
Sure, but
that
my question is then, like, why shouldn't we then have these discussions with the people who don't yet agree and who aren't with our ideas, right? Like,
is there anybody in this room who
I
doesn't
mean, have
agree?
y'all? When was the last time y'all read a disability act or talked about disability or blackness or either or both?
For blackness, the last tournament that I was at,
Like
there
when was the last time
other
you talked
teams that
about them
read
in Constitution?
anti-blackness.
Yeah, but like my question is, what makes you the choir, right? Because you're saying in this debate we're preaching a choir.
You're
Why
preaching to
shouldn't
the
we
people
have a
that
discussion?
agree with you. We're
You're
saying
reading framework against us. How do you agree with us? Like what?
we
I don't understand.
okay. We don't disagree with the substance of
Sure,
like black disabled people face different
Right.
issues. We say that the issue at hand is that we should look for ways to be able to
Sure. My
solve
next question
this.
is, you say that we have to solve we have warming and debate is key to solving warming. How does debate solve warming?
Well, one is the topic for this year, so
Well,
it gives
like,
us
no,
the
but-
ability
yeah.
to have the education
What's the
around
spillover?
the resolution to be able to understand how different things
How
could
does that
potentially solve
solve?
warming.
But how does that solve warming? Like why does?
So like the education and advocacy skills that people gain from debate.
So why
to
doesn't
go
our
on to do other
education and
things.
advocacy skills that we have by having these discussions and forcing people to listen to this
Again.
solve psych violence?
That is the critique that we have of you.
Okay.
One, people can't engage in this
Sure.
because it's not an advocacy of like something that you do,
Okay, yeah.
and
My-
so people aren't like. We could say sure that solves psych violence for you, but that doesn't solve
My
it for
next
other
question
people.
is why
And
does the permutation prove that like we can't debate? Why
because
can't
you
you
said
just
that there was
Sure.
quote unquote nothing there's not competing methodologies, but
Why
there's
can't-
absolutely no
You
why,
trade
trade-off.
off.
hold on. Why can't you just say one you
dissent
didn't
was
read
that
a
you
trade
don't
off
solve
dissent.
warming.
Two, why can't you just say we don't get a permutation and like K teams don't get a permutation
Why
and
don't
then
you
that
just say
solves? Like I don't understand why the permutation is a proof of harm, but that's fine.
Because it proves that you can engage with the federal government and warming and not have a trade-off.
You have to win the communication.
You did.
I sent the one in ours, and it worked from my email, but I don't know where everyone else's internet is at.
I have it.
I have it.
Okay.
Oh, can we get a
Yeah.
question?
Oh, yeah.
Have you tried reconnecting recently?
Yeah.
In the meantime, what's the order?
K then case.
Actually, no, it's not that one. False promises.
Yeah, wait, actually, Alec, could you flash it over to me? My email isn't loading.
Cruel opportunity. I'm on the screen and I'm getting the circle, but it's not downloading.
Can you shoot it that way?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Keep trying to reload my Gmail page because it like shows I have internet, but
It's not, your flash drive is not showing. I think it's been removed unsafely too many times. It did say unrecognized USB for a quick second.
I was gonna say we might be in trouble.
You have to click safely remove, bro.
I never do that. I've never had a problem.
Never not safely removed.
call it 1 in our round 4.
It's just one in our Binghamton.
Oh wait, no? Okay, I got it.
Anybody not ready?
The 1AC is not described in ontological terms, but it does assume a sort of fixed category across social description. You can extend the ANG piece of evidence, which says that we need to queer the way that we approach social distinction. It says it talks specifically about the locality of anti-blackness in the social relation. The locality of anti-blackness in the social relation. This is really important when you evaluate their answers to the criticism, because because this evidence is really good it's really good as to how you should look at this locality. It says that the alternative to anti-blackness, to understand that blackness is not something that is fixed, but something that was created through one description of historical processes. The way that we can change this by queering these historical processes in the first place, and denying the idea that the anti-blackness is the dominant historical narrative. That they make this argument about that they're just personal experience and not ontological orientation. They make a scripting dissent. The answer to the scripting dissent is that even if you aren't, we agree that you might not be a description of ontology. You were correct in that, but you do defend a sort of fixed position. You do defend a sort of fixed positioning that has created a body politic. Even for you, it's probably that is described upon a fixed description of history that reinscribes oppression in a certain way, which is why we need the criticism. The link is that the concept of a body that fixes identity as a meaning that is codified of an identity oppression. Only a clear rejection of such signification can undermine the body as a site of oppression. Assuming, and 2, the body, what is to the subject ideological accounts of subject formation emphasize systemic structures signifying subject formation across the dominant structure was often thought of in terms of coding. The grid was conceived as oppositional framework of culturally constructed significations, male versus female, black versus white, gay versus straight, and so on. A body corresponded to a site on the grid. The body became defined by spinning to the grid as the body is linked to a particular subject positioning across more than a local embodied of ideology, whereas the potential for change on the space of crossing the gaps between position on the grid falls into a theoretical noma. Nobody's lacking in the notion of there is a qualitative movement. The body is directly concerned as sensing up signification and silence on the question of queering is a delegitimation of queer knowledge combined with foregrounding arguments. It's a reason to vote negative. You say things in the 2AC like black people are not meant to survive, which proves that you are making generalizations about the social for black people in society. Jackson and A. Discourses are significant not just for the way that they, not for what they say, but also for what they do not say. The silences of discourse can be as important as silence means of misdirection, the suppression or delegitimization of alternative forms of knowledge or values, setting the boundaries of legitimate knowledge as a kind of disciplining process directed against certain actors. Silences within a text often function as an exercise in power, and thinking blackness is an exclusive product of political history freezes it in a form of predetermined by power. This squelches the unruly character of black possibility and turns the F-411. Blackness is intensified when we consider the historical circumstances. The forces become stronger when we consider the deeper trajectories of black resistance and carries out to do so, which may perhaps miss the way that blackness claims an unruly place in philosophy and history, grasps the event of its effectuation in the state of affairs as a lived experience, with the event in itself becoming a specific consistency itself, positing as a concept escapes history. The crucial issue is an attempt to an experimental the practice that opposes itself to the interpretation of text, proposing instead what we think of books as a literal machine mask, or what it functions with, defining lines only in relation to finite points, and produces a calculatable grid, a structure that then appears as a hidden intelligibility of the system of society generally. Then on the next piece of evidence that you read, you say that there is there is an impossible distinction. You make this impossible distinction of disability, but the only way that we could recognize and queer the concept of disability is through the alternative. The impact is that if you don't endorse queering, you endorse heteronormative normalization. That heteronormativity infects every social structure, makes them violently genocidal, which turns the affirmative. Yet in 13, the devastating pervasiveness of hatred and violence based on othering and marginalization are results of an invisible center. Normalization is the process of establishing in all companies standard dominant cultural values. Normalization becomes the primary instrument of power in modern society. Normalization, materially violent. Normalization is the side of violence. Heteronormative discourses, abject and abdominal bodies, souls, persons, and life forms are created and disciplined. Heteronormativity is the quintessential force creating, sustaining, and perpetuating present. Heteronormativity is ubiquitous in all structures of understanding. And the violence of heteronormativity is immediate and intimate, built into the social institutions which you have described in the 2AC. Next, the permutation debate. The alternative must be foregrounded prior to the queering, must be essential, constituted, not additive to reconfigure our oppressive understanding of race, gender, and sexuality. Angle 11. Queering the Black Atlantic offers bold ways to imagine and rethink the intersectional and interdisciplinary relationships to queering as long overdue queer diasporas methodologies to address sustained attention to different and uneven histories of slavery. There is a great deal of urgency for us to map a crucial analytic shift to engage more strategically with the here and there for the local reconfiguration of subalternity. The local reconfiguration of racist queer studies moves to take up more centrally question of political economy and racial formation. The analytic vice in the discipline will be sharpened. Case. On your first argument, you say that on your first argument about civil rights, anti-blackness is codified in legal structure, which means even if you win the argument that civil rights wasn't always solving through legislation, the affirmative isn't capable of solving because your discussions, or because there's no reason why your discussions can't happen at the same time as a description of policy. For instance, the Crossix proves that the discussion about Martin Luther King's speech about having a dream, his movement while he's giving the speech was also discussing policy options for people of color, something that the AF conveniently forgets, or conveniently avoids. Voting AF doesn't mean that you've moved along their movement at all, and your description of state action is wrong. Nobody can actually skip that part. Failure to engage legal structure with policy demands vacates politics and turns the movement bogs into decay. As political decay widens and social problems go unsolved, the widespread retreat from politics comes at a time when social agendas ignore global factors will be reduced to localist withdrawals powerfully reinforced by devaluation of state and federal politics. An increasing number turns away from public concern to negate the very idea of politics as a source of social transformation. The way the fate of the world hangs in the balance, even as anti-politics encapsulates culture, it's still vagaries of political power that will shape the future.
Actually, yeah, now.
Alright.
The F is a reading over the topic that challenges the normative ways of engagement that this activity promotes. Every call for us to talk about the topic is in a specific way is how we become addicted to perfection. Y'all just trying to live forever and keep all of the hell locked up in the cell. We are instead fugitives who refuse to be locked within the cell, which allows us to combat the psychological violence that occurs because of this forced engagement. When you feel what it's like to be told that your arguments don't belong in debate, you should go to a speech activity and overcome the obstacles that structurally exclude you from politics. That's how you understand how violent things like framework actually are. The fugitivity of the F and the performance of the 1AC work to challenge how violence operationalizes itself in the space. This space is key because this is where ideas are formulated and the content of these ideas matter. This means that the role of the ballot is to vote for the team that best shapes the debate space and how we engage in these activities. The F resolves this because of the content of the conversations that we promote in these spaces. Teams like Georgetown changed their rhetoric in round because of the environment that the F creates. This means that they're probably better policymakers. Now onto their specific case arguments. Their Bronx evidence assumes that we are complete abandoning of politics, which is not true. The 1AC is a challenge to how the norms of politics operate with it, which allows embodied experience, which is our Arabella's over this was goal conceded the entirety of the block. The fact that they think we weren't political is an independent reason to reject them in the context of a concrete evidence, which talks about how this recreates Western knowledge production, i.e. black knowledge is never seen as that which is credible, that which is political. Black and disabled people are never seen as political subjects, which means that they just reinforce that sort of Western logic and create that sort of educational model, which means that their activity is actually problematic for people of color who are disabled. Now, onto their framework proper. Now, we say that they are saying that we are in the wrong form. This is violent institutionalization of black disabled people. We aren't allowed to talk about that. So we are sent to speech activities because we are too emotional. This is how this ability is disqualified. With supercharges like Campbell evidence, which goes co-conceded throughout the entirety of the block, is going to be dealing on their framework argument because it means that the produce literally institutionalized disabled people because they do not engage in the normative ways of expression that they're calling for. This is why the technocratic solutions that the framework posits would always lead back into that disqualification of disabled people, which is the Arabella's evidence, and that's also the concrete evidence, which means that we will never have a level playing field in the context of the activity, which means that the structural unfairness is always going to outweigh the little nuances that they're talking about, i.e. the research burden. The research burden is probably good in the context of you not saying anything about disability and securitizing against black people. Your research burden should be you should know how to talk to disabled people in the round. Now we say that the permutation arguments that they're making just means that there wasn't the counterplan wasn't mutually exclusive. It's not a justification. There was no justification given for the counterplan, which means that if you can't answer a permutation argument, you should probably not win a counterplan. But that doesn't mean that we're not topical. It just means that there's actually a way in which we can actually engage you. There's no problem. There's no problem with having a state good versus state bad debate. Now the critique also proves that they can engage if they had specific links to ableism or things like what their authors are saying. Then we probably could have had a discussion. KVK. Now they criminalize the way in which those forms of debate occur within the debate space, which means that their education probably reproduces that sort of ivory tower mentality that this is the one way that you should debate. Now in the interpretation debate, don't let them get away with saying that their interpretation would include us. This is how whiteness shifts its politics to accommodate black disabled people, but then leaves them behind in climate disasters. Now, this is why you prefer our counter-interpretation to add should be able to discuss should be able to have a discussion of black disability as it relates to the resolution, which we literally read the resolution under the 1AC and started talking about how that relates to the black disabled body. Now, that's a better interpretation because it allows for our affirmative to exist. Now, in a world where their interpretation would eliminate our affirmative, it's probably a reason why you prefer our interpretation. It's literally just one more plan, one more research burden. You should be able to talk about black disabled people. Now, their contestability arguments are literally turned by the entirety of the after these places we've never been saying we can't wait, we can't race, we not fit, we wheelbarrows and wheel carriages. Now, these are all the arguments that we're talking about. We never have access to these conversations. It's not a question of whether or not ableism is justified, but about dealing with the justifications for ableism in spaces like debate. This is why the debate space is key to understanding how these arguments work. We need to have a conversation about that in these rounds in order to understand that their form of debate will only lead to extra topicality because we are never going to be topical, especially in the context of them not having any evidence for disabled people in the round. Now, topical version I probably promotes promotes that, which means that they don't get access to that. We're turning an educational model, which means that we're turning the impacts of the topicality. Even if you believe that we're not topical, their impact turns to their model of debate, which means that topicality goes away. Now, onto the critique debate, there's literally still no link here. They have scripted the one they see as an ontological analysis of anti-blackness, which is anti-blackness, an independent reason to reject them as a team, because this is how psychological violence operates in these spaces. Now, if they can't resolve psychological violence as an independent reason to vote affirmative, now also it justifies the permutation because we resolve the impacts of the links, because we are already that dysphoric queerness that they're talking about. You can read any disability studies article. It comes from queerness theory. It comes from the ability to understand that your body is that which is not normative. That's the entirety of the one to see. If you would actually engage with the bars of the one to see, you probably know that that's also an impact to the concrete evidence, and also is the justification why it turns this sort of educational model, because they cannot listen to the affirmative and talk about anything, but never actually talk about the genuine conversations that they're calling for us to have, which turns all the impacts out of Jackson evidence, and also turns framework. The Jackson evidence specifically talks about how we can't silence people who are trying to have these discussions within the political realm, which means that this is a turn to their framework argument. Either their critique argument makes sense, or their framework makes sense, which means that the critique goes away. It's a double bind.
343.
gonna be K and then T.
K and T.
It's just gonna be on the independent voter on the K.